Welcome to the Compost Pile, a podcast where we break down gardening, homesteading, and more. Join your hosts, David Poole and Aaron Barnhill, as they pile up information and break it down so that you can be more successful in the garden.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Compost Pile podcast, your podcast for all things gardening, homesteading, plenty of other stuff. I'm Aaron. As always, with me is your co-host, David Poole, owner of Mid-County Farm and Feed. We're sitting here in Gardening Zone 9A or B?
A.
9A. So sit tight. What do we got today?
Today we're talking about all things container gardening.
All things container gardening, yeah. So basically that comes down to when you don't plant a plant into ground, you plant it in a box or a barrel or...
whatever you might have, just... it could be nursery pots laying around. You go buy some fancy pots.
What are some of the weirdest containers you've ever seen someone using?
Tires are always weird for me, especially if you're growing food. That's always a strange one.
Yeah.
Old cattle syrup tubs. I mean, it's not weird, but it's not a common item.
I've seen a lot of people use those tubs, right? Yeah. I mean, they're galvanized. I've seen some pretty weird ones. One that I think is actually a lot more common than you would think is a toilet. I see people using the toilets all the time, right? You use the tank in the back and you use the bowl.
Take it back. The weirdest one is an old chair. It was like an old it's an old hairdryer chair that Desiree has.
An old hairdryer. Okay.
The seat is all cut out, and she had like succulents and cactus in there.
Yeah.
It was super cool.
She's pretty interesting. We all start our seeds in containers too, right? Yeah. Every time the spring comes around and I want to start my seeds indoors, I usually go get like a plastic bag of Solo cups, put a couple holes in it, double bag them. I mean, that's a little container.
Yeah, really anything can be a container. I mean, people planting milk crates. You can line milk crates. There's nothing that can't be
milk
used.
Jug.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Milk jug. Yeah.
There's no right or wrong option. You can buy fancy things and you can use whatever you can find. Just really whatever suits your fancy.
I used to when I was like in my early 20s and I was enjoying gardening and stuff, because I've been doing this for a long time. I used to want to start like a YouTube channel called Guerrilla Gardening, where I just like went around and found trash. And I really, so don't tell anybody this, right? If you're watching, don't tell them that I do this. But I raid the dumpster at Ellis Pottery like very often, or I used to. I don't do it so much anymore, and it's because they throw out so much stuff, and in that is a lot of containers. So every fall when they have like the marigolds and the mums, all of those like the porch ones you get, whenever they die, they throw away the container, the soil, and the whole mums. They just throw it all away in their dumpster. So that's great compost, right? Just throw it all in there. I've got my dirt, and then I have a free container.
Yeah.
I used to have so many containers. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. That's true.
No. We rack up used containers all the time from planning landscape jobs. It's either throw them away or hope that somebody can use them. So it's, but I mean, there's so many different options in containers. And I think we'll talk a little bit about some of the different common options that people will use.
Like materials they're made of.
What they're made out of and some of the advantages. But first, I think we've got to talk about maybe what are kind of the pros and cons, the advantages, and maybe some of the limitations of what you can do with container gardening. Container gardening definitely speaks to people with small spaces.
Right, yeah.
Apartment dwellers, people that don't have, or maybe you live in a rental property and you can't plant anything in the ground.
Sure.
Containers are so versatile because you can really grow pretty much anything.
You can grow food, you can grow ornamentals.
You can grow fruits. The possibilities are endless, but it does take up a lot more space. You don't get the advantage of a raised bed where you can plant things tighter, so you're going to have lots of wasted space. So you do have to be a little bit more intentional about what you plant, and you might not be able to experiment as much as somebody with an in-ground or a raised bed garden, because there's only so many places you can put containers depending on the space that you have.
Right. But that's one good thing about the containers too, is that you can move them around.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're not super familiar with your setting, with your yard, say you just bought a new house or you're in a new apartment, You can really experiment with the sun and the exposure and the wind
Yeah.
and move your container around, even maybe forever, or until you want to plant what's in that container in the ground.
Yeah, definitely. And being able to experiment, containers make great options for that. We had some kind of dwarf mulberries that I bought from Southern Nurseries a long time ago, and we potted them up. They're just small, kind of miniature versions, and I could never get them to thrive. And so we just started moving one of the two around
Yeah.
in different places in the front yard garden. And
What,
I
what did
finally
you,
hit the
what did
sweet
you end
spot.
up doing? Because I have a dwarf mulberry in a pot, and it's never done good.
I-
It's literally
I-
never done good.
I moved it more to the shady area, more
Yeah.
indirect light, and the growth exploded. It looked healthier. It looked happier. Everything about it got better. And the other one that we left in the same place, and we
Yeah.
experimented some other locations, it still doesn't look as good. So it's very interesting. Pots give you that versatility that you're not going to get with other.
Yeah, and
things.
so you had two of the same
Same
plant,
thing.
right? So you left one there. That's kind of the control for the experiment. Moved it around.
They were in the
That's
same size
Yeah.
pot, same soil, so everything else was the same, but we were able to experiment. So
I kind of
it's a really
thought
cool
it.
thing.
I thought it was the light because it didn't do very well in the direct sun, and I moved it around a bunch of times. I ended up moving it under a hoop trellis for cucumbers that I had, and when the cucumbers' vegetative state was very overflowing, and it created a lot of shadow for it. It did well, and then as the season progressed and that died back, it started
getting kind of
started getting bad again.
Yeah.
But that is one of the things that a container does very well. You can test where it's going to be.
Yeah. The containers, man, just the versatility is awesome.
Yeah.
Some limitations that you'll experience is really going to be, again, while you're trying to put things in limited space, if space is a concern, there's only so much space you can create. You're limited on the size a plant can grow based upon the size of the container. And that can also
Yeah.
create some challenges on what you're trying to grow if your container isn't chosen properly size-wise. And we kind of get into a little bit of that later on. But they also require far more care than something that's going to grow in the ground. You're going to
Yeah.
need more inputs, more resources to keep a plant happy and healthy in a container a lot of times than any other
And we
option.
kind of touched on that in the fundamental series when we're talking about
Yeah.
soil in the first place, right? And we talked about how much soil something's planted in versus little can really change the volatility of that situation, right?
Yeah.
As far as when it dries out or how much fertilizer you need. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and you think about like you're limited on size of the plant. I know that you have quite a few citrus in containers, which
Yeah,
are great
yeah.
because you can move those in with this cold snap we just
And
had.
I just did.
Yeah,
And
you have that ability to protect them fairly easily versus the client that I had the other day. We're out, putting out stakes and providing pine straw to insulate and frost cloth because they're in the ground. Nothing else we can do. But
but the challenge with that though, because they are citrus and they're like bushes, shrubs, trees,
Yeah,
right?
you're
They want to be big.
Yeah, you're thinking like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm going to have this huge, like a citrus, depending on the rootstock, could be 15 to 20, 25 foot tall at its maturity.
Yeah.
Well, in a container, you're not going to achieve that unless you've got 45 gallon, 50 gallon, 100 gallon pots. Well, then that defeats the purpose of the container.
Yeah.
So you're limited on the size and the production if it's something that is fruit or vegetable producing. So, you might have more of a shrub.
Yeah.
You may prune that citrus to be more bushy instead of more tree form. So you kind of have to take those things into consideration when you're planting
Yeah.
larger items in pots.
And save your back too. I mean, that's what I've done. My citrus shrubs, because I prune them, and like you were just saying, to get them down that size. I went to Lowe's the other day and bought a dolly because I'm just tired of moving around. They
Yeah.
are in 45-gallon pots, right? My lemon and lime are in 45-gallon pots. My grapefruit tree is in like a 40-gallon pot.
That's
And
like
it's-
our dragon fruit.
Yeah.
It's in a and a Vigo bed dragon fruit planter. Luckily, it has wheels because if it didn't,
Oh my
there's
gosh,
no way
because you'll hurt yourself.
I could pick it up.
Yeah.
Plus, it grows upright and over, so you're trying to get up underneath it with all this stuff hanging over you. So being able to move them around. So if you have lots of space and you do like container growing,
Yeah.
have that plan of how you're going to move them around. I think back to like when we had Tom on the winterization episode, if he didn't have a dolly or something available or a cart to move all those plants that he has around into his structure, there's no way you'd get it done. I hate
You'll hurt yourself.
I hate when the cold comes because it's the last thing I'm going to do is put the plants in.
Yeah.
And then I think about some of the containers and I'm just like, I got to pick that one up again.
I mean, but when the cold comes, you're going to work no matter what.
Yeah.
You're either bringing in these containers and these plants, or you're working really hard to cover them and shroud them and protect them. So you just got to pick your poison on that.
For sure.
Going back to, you were talking about dragon fruit. I find that very interesting because I've never grown dragon fruit. That's a little bit more exotic than anything I've ever grown. But when I see people who grow dragon fruit, they're always in a container. Is there certain fruits or vegetables or plants that you find are better in a container than in the ground?
I mean, I feel like almost any vegetable could really do well in a container, especially leafy greens.
Yeah.
You can definitely grow tomatoes in a container with an appropriate size pot and an appropriate variety. You don't want to grow a indeterminate vining tomato that could theoretically get 15 foot tall, in a container, because then you're not going to have any way to support it. I grew kind of an indeterminate variety this year. I was doing more of a soil trial than anything, and it got so tall that when the wind would come, it would just keep blowing over, and I had to find a place to prop them and wedge them.
String it up, right?
Yeah, because the top growth of the plant was so heavy and so much that it would just blow the whole pot over.
Right.
So there you got to think about the size of the plant and the variety that you're choosing. If it is going to be something you got to consider constantly pruning. But fruits, you could grow citrus. You could grow a fig in a container. You could definitely grow maybe
a
blueberries.
Dwarf mulberry.
Yeah, mulberry. You could probably grow like some dwarf blackberries. I mean, you could really grow anything, if you keep it at the appropriate size.
Right.
So, I could think of some things that might not work well. Like, I don't think you're going to grow like a muscadine or a grape.
Yeah,
and,
things that are like
things
vining
and
they're
going to be
huge.
massive.
You say that is funny. So I like to plant passion vines, right?
Yeah.
Because they make beautiful flowers. The butterflies really love them, right? We're helping pollinators. And I have a red passion vine, passion flower that seems to be like kind of a fruitless variety. This one doesn't produce. I do have a fruited variety that grows on kind of a derelict pear tree I have. But this one is for my pergola in the back. And it's in a pretty big container. I'm not sure exactly why I chose to put it in a container instead of in the ground, because it almost would be the same. But it just seemed to be a little bit more easy to take care of in that way, right? But it is thriving, man. It's took off. And its biomass is huge. It's covered my pergola. It's actually a natural shade. And it's in a container.
We have one. It is in a small raised bed.
Yeah.
But we constantly keep it cut to like head high.
Really?
Because it can't vine everywhere. We don't have the room for it to vine everywhere.
I've let mine just go everywhere. It's in an elderberry bush. It just jumped.
Yeah.
It's going across the fence. I'm like, whatever.
And that kind of is a consideration in a way, because you plant something like that and then you have it too close to other things, that biomass and all that is going to grow. It could be growing into other things.
And then it can outcompete things for sunlight. All
passion
kinds
vines
of stuff.
are infamous for just dropping or new shoots coming out. Like, we'll get new shoots halfway across the yard.
Yeah, that's the fruited one, the green, passion fruit ball that drops down. It's everywhere, right? And it's coming up. It's in shoots everywhere. I mow it over. I mow these little passion fruits over with the lawnmower, and it just scatters them to the wind. Yeah, I'm like Oprah over here. I'm like, you get a passion vine. You get a passion vine.
Yeah.
Check under your seat.
Might be one there.
There's a passion vine under there. That's pretty good.
So let's talk a little bit about like types of containers.
Yeah.
We touched a little bit, that you could really use anything in container growing, but most people when they're growing, they somewhat do care about what it looks like. Not everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and it depends on really what your end goal is. If you've got just a few things that you're growing, a lot of people are going to get a nicer looking pot.
Yeah.
Whereas if somebody's growing a ton of seedlings or they just have a lot of stuff, then they'll typically use like a nursery pot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
nursery pot is kind of your bare bones container, and they come in all different grades. You can get like very, very thin, blow molded nursery pots that are
That's the
fairly
ones that are
inexpensive.
typically black, kind
Yeah,
of like
but you
ribbed
can,
on the outside.
yeah, and you can
right?
crinkle them pretty easily. But then they also have higher grade that are they're much thicker. They will hold their shape if you squeeze on them very well, and they're often quite a bit more expensive.
Right.
But they're still more economical than turning around and getting like
A decorative
a
pot,
decorative
yeah.
plastic pot. That plastic pots. A lot of times are pretty expensive depending on the size. Then the bigger the pot, obviously the cost always goes up. But plastic tends to be really the most economical
Yeah.
choice for most people when they're growing things.
And it's light. That's the other thing too. We're talking about moving
Yeah.
plants in and out of a
Yep.
space. If you have a gigantic pot that's made of terracotta, that thing is heavy.
Yeah, and terracotta, ironically, most clay pots are not made in the States. Most all
They're
pottery.
all from Mexico, aren't they?
They could be from Mexico. They could be from Vietnam.
Yeah.
Italy, Thailand. Most pottery is imported. Now there's one terracotta producer in Texas, Deroma.
Huh.
They make standard terracotta, and that's it. And then they import everything else, and those are fairly inexpensive. So you can get some smaller size like
Yeah,
terracotta
yeah.
pots pretty cheap.
But there is a difference in these materials with this, because if we're talking about plastic versus terracotta, not only is the weight a big difference, but also water impermeability is
Yeah.
a big difference, right? You can water something in a plastic pot, and if it doesn't have drain holes that are drilled on the bottom, the water's not going to get out of it.
No.
But even if there isn't a drain hole in a terracotta, water will eventually make its way out.
The pottery itself is permeable,
Right.
And that can be a disadvantage to terracotta is that it tends to dry out faster.
Right.
So you think about like people using I think they're called like olas, like the little.
It's like the jug that you bury, yeah, and you
pour it in there, and the water permeates through the
right
walls.
slowly.
of
It's
the-
like
yeah.
a time release kind of a capsule. Yeah.
So it just goes to show you that while it is a great choice, it is it's going to require a little bit more water. Interesting enough too, when you look at like actually like pottery, not all pottery can handle cold weather. Not all pottery is
right.
frost resistant,
Right.
And because you think, okay, I have this porous item, and water particles or molecules have absorbed into the walls of this pot, and then when we get a heavy frost or freeze, it can crack,
It
it can
expands,
break.
yeah.
So we get enough cold here that could damage pottery. So being cheap
Right.
pottery may not be the way to go. But
And even if it doesn't freeze here, we do have very wild shifts in
Yeah.
temperatures. Yeah.
yeah, so there's such things like frost resistant pottery that's out there. But most of the time it'll be labeled that way. That's kind of interesting. Most people don't think about that. Same thing like a concrete statuary.
Right,
like,
right, yeah. Yeah, concrete is also permeable. Water will eventually leak. Another thing funny, you brought up old like cattle pan, right? Stuff like that,
Yeah.
old tanks, galvanized steel and stuff like that. One thing that I see when people use those, they actually usually line it with like black visqueen or plastic first to
Yeah.
mitigate some of the effects that water has on these metals.
Yeah. So metal containers obviously have the disadvantage of eventually rusting out.
Right.
So, and then depending on what you're growing, metal containers might not be the best choice. If you have to be careful. Like you grow like in a galvanized container. If you go and buy like a galvanized wash tub, most galvanized wash tubs nowadays are what they call hot dipped. They're in a coating on them, and that coating is not food safe.
Oh, wow, okay.
It can actually flake off, and so you think about these things that are in there. So if we're growing something that's edible,
Right.
some of those are not going to be the best choice.
Yeah.
Whereas your pottery or just your plastic pot might be the safer choice.
Yeah, and then we also have grow bags too, right?
Yeah, grow bags are great. And I think they're one of the most underrated options for growing in containers because grow bags allow air to access the root
Right.
system. So if you've ever unpotted something and you look at the root ball and you see the roots are circling
Yeah.
around,
Right. Right.
you know, that's one thing that you don't get in grow bags because the you know those roots are growing, searching for oxygen, and there's not very many points of infiltration into that soil and that grow bag. It can
Right.
breathe all the way around, so they make really good ways to grow a super healthy plant with a lot less chance of having to repot as
Yeah.
quickly.
And then too, when we're talking about these materials and how they're different, and you have terracotta that is permeable, and then you have a grow bag which is super
Yeah.
permeable, that's going to dictate how many times you water something. You have to pay attention to your plants more often because there's a positive and a negative, or you know, a good perk and a bad perk every time too. The roots are getting more air, but they're also losing water
Yep.
more quickly. So therefore, maybe you want to utilize a terracotta or a grow bag to plant something that doesn't like to have, you know, wet roots, doesn't like to sit in a lot of water. That'd be a
Absolutely.
good thing to do too.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty smart option, I would say.
I'd say so too. I personally, I can be neglectful sometimes, and grow bags are a little more difficult for me because I'm not always checking on my plants every day. And
Yeah.
with a grow bag, you really need to, especially when it starts getting hotter. My dad used to come over, and he would like look around, and he would see some of my citrus in a pots, and he'd just kind of like nudge it to test the weight, and he'd be like, "That needs water. That needs water, right? Because they're bone dry."
Yeah.
So I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, I
Right.
think soil and water, I think, are two incredibly important considerations when you're growing in a container, and they kind of go together because we have to be very particular about what kind of soil we go in there. But I have noticed with higher quality soils, like we planted some flowers in some cocoa coir baskets, which is obviously incredibly permeable, very much like a grow bag. But I used a really good soil, and it had really good water holding capacity, and I didn't have to water them as often as I thought I would.
Okay, yeah,
Because
yeah.
you water a cocoa liner, it doesn't. Once you get it saturated, the water just pours out.
It does, yeah.
So I was worried I was going to have to be watering these, and they weren't going to survive at all because I was going to get busy, and it just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think you have to really pay attention to what soil you use. One of the things that you see, like one of the biggest mistakes people make is they get the cheapest soil, cheapest potting soil,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or they get a and I'm going to say this and then I'm going to retract it in a sense, but they get garden soil.
Right, okay.
So, garden soil doesn't have any amendments in it. It doesn't have a lot of drainage amendments. It's designed to put into the ground and mix in or work with existing in-ground soils.
It's like a little above topsoil, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
a lot higher quality ingredients. Probably has compost and such in it, which all those things are great in a container. But if it doesn't have drainage amendments, then you're going to get soggy roots. You're going to get root rot. You might get disease that starts depending on what you've planted. So I think you have to spend money on a good quality soil or know enough about how to kind of amend your own soil.
Yeah.
Now, you can get away with buying the cheap soil if you have on hand amendments that you can embetter that soil. And some of those ingredients in that soil will lead to being able to hold water, just the right amount, and letting the excess go through very well, so that you don't get root rot or those negative effects of overwatering.
Yeah.
But no matter what you do, you're going to have to water far more in those containers because regardless of what you choose for actual container material, it is going to dry out faster.
Right. And the roots aren't going as far. They're staying more close. So they're utilizing because it's a volume issue. We're talking about volume, right? It's never going to be as much volume as the plant probably
So there's
wants.
less water holding capacity because you have less soil, but also you have gravity.
Right.
The water is heavier than maybe some of the soil particles or certain aspects, and it is going to find its way down.
Right.
As most things do. So you over time, it's just going to drain out. So you've got to water more often. And when you're doing it in containers, people always ask, well, how often? You just got to stick your fingers in the dirt. If you can stick it down knuckle deep and like you're still feeling like moisture, the soil's coming out damp, kind of stuck to your hand, you're probably okay. If the plant's still looking good, but if it comes out dry, then it's time to water and water deeply. Let it, kind of you were talking about how your dad would like push the plant, and you can oftentimes tell if you've watered enough. If you watered and you think you watered enough and you can still pick it up and the plant is very light, that means that soil hasn't saturated.
Right.
You haven't reached the point of saturation. It may be coming out the bottom, but it doesn't mean it's actually absorbing into the root ball.
Yeah, because water finds a path of least resistance, and it could have a point through there where a lot of water's flowing out, but it hasn't spread all the way.
That's why we like to, especially when we water like big trees at the store, we'll just turn the hose on and we'll turn it on a lower volume, and we'll just let it go for a longer period of time, because we know the majority of the excess is going to come out, and we're not overwatering or doing this every day. But we're allowing it to get a chance to actually absorb and not just kind of giving it a quick go and thinking that it's watered, but it's not.
I have a question for you. So when I'm thinking about a container garden, and let's say I plant an annual, right, that's going to last for 6 months. It's a flower. It's going to come up. It's going to bloom, and it's going to die. And I want to reuse that soil that I paid all that money for because I bought good quality soil. What do we need to do between plants, right? I mean, I'm sure that every plant has different requirements, but just generally speaking.
So it really is going to depend on the type of soil that you started with. If you're using maybe like a peat-based soil, those plants die out, it dries up because nothing's growing in it. Then you've got to get it soaked so that it can absorb water again, and you can actually work it, because if it's compacted, then it's going to be really hard to get something new established in it. If you're using a high-quality soil, maybe a cocoa coir-based soil that will stay loose consistently, you might just rejuvenate it with some compost, a little bit of fertilizer.
Just kind of get the roots of that last plant out, right? Yep. And then maybe just amend it with a little compost. It might be all you need to do.
A little bit of slow-release organic fertilizer, and just make sure, can you work the soil? Can you dig in it freely?
So make sure that it's not compact, right?
Yeah.
So make sure it's okay.
And not just the top, like you get down a little bit, because sometimes you'll get into areas where it's compacted in the middle.
Yeah.
Maybe say remnants of that root ball from, the soil from the plant you planted initially. Making sure that those things are kind of broken up and that the new roots have easy access into the soil and they're not hitting harder areas and having just kind of like a stopping point,
Another okay, that's good. That's good stuff. Actually, I've kind of wondered that for a long time. Another thing too is, since we're talking about containers and soil, the soil that's in these containers are isolated from the rest of the dirt in the entire world. And the thing we know about soil is it's a holistic system, right? We have earthworms we have mycelium and fungi and all of that. Are there any specific challenges that we need to address when we're using container soil? How do we get some of those beneficial things like worms and mycelium in there, or is that even something we have to worry about?
I think it is something that you should worry about. I know mycelium, definitely having good bacteria and good fungi. You can achieve that by, just keep reharping on, if you're buying soil, get a good quality soil that has living microbes in it, but also if you're fertilizing organically or with a complete fertilizer that will maybe have some of those microbes that you can start populating in there. If it doesn't already have it, you can supply those items into that soil and keep it going.
Yeah.
You will have to feed more though. That's one of the other disadvantages of a container is just like moisture, how moisture works its way out. Well, and then we talk about how you have to water more. Well, we know from previous episodes that the more you water, the more nutrients move.
Right.
Whenever we're breaking down those nutrients and we're continually watering, those nutrients are working their way out of the containers or out of the root zone, and they're no longer accessible at all.
Right.
Unlike in the ground, where they will move out of the root zone, but then mycelium has still
it gets replenished,
Yeah.
right? In the naturally in the soil, it replenishes itself, but in in a
In the
container,
container,
that's your job. You have to keep an eye out for that, right?
you know, you're going to be feeding more often, and I'll always recommend a slow release organic, because if you go and you look at like traditional, like run of the mill fertilizers, you know, or take like a bag of triple 13 off the shelf, you get you a 4 pound bag. Um, Most of those fertilizers, a lot of them are quick release. And if you read the fine print, it'll tell you a lot of times it's not for container use,
Right.
because you have this concentrated amount of soil
In a
and
small
you're putting
volume.
this quick release fertilizer in there, and you can burn the plant up. You can cause it to grow too quickly, and not get good results. But you know, on the other hand, there are, you know, similar fertilizers that are what they call homogenized. They're every pellet is exactly the same analysis, and a lot of those homogenized type products are slow release in the synthetic world.
And they have a lot less chance of burning.
So a lot of less
burning
chance of
something up,
burning.
Yeah.
So you know, you want to be careful about what you choose, and we always go the organic route because it's easy.
Yeah, I know some things are almost impossible to burn a plant with, like fish meal, bone meal, like these things, worm castings.
You know, I mean, you don't want to use too much because it's wasteful, but you know, it definitely makes it a lot easier on you, especially in a container where it is easier to burn up a plant.
Real quick, kind of a rapid fire style. Could you give me maybe like top 5 plants that are suitable for containers?
Always going to say peppers.
You know what? It's literally my favorite plant to plant in a container is peppers.
Peppers can grow year round, all the time, so it makes it super simple. I'm always going to go with, you know, not anything in particular, but some type of a flower.
Okay.
Because it's easy color, whether it's just for accents or for functionality.
Yeah.
For pollinator attracting.
Stuff like bottle brush, right?
Yeah.
Super attractive.
Number 3, I will say any form of the herb family, because
Basil.
absolutely. You know, because there's functionality, even for somebody who doesn't really like to grow a lot of stuff, or maybe they only have limited access. It's a usable plant.
Yeah.
It's a pollinator attractor. You know, so it hits all the marks.
I will say too, some herbs grow like weeds, right? And when we say it, you know, the usual suspect is mint. A lot of people only want to plant mint into a container to keep it literally contained, because if you plant it in your yard, it'll be everywhere. Yeah. So that's 3. Give me 2 more. Yeah.
Oh man.
I know you didn't know I was going to do this.
No. I would say citrus.
Okay,
You know.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we've talked about.
You're
that,
making me feel really good right now. These are like the things that I like to keep in a container.
Those are good items, you know. And then, unrelated to most of the topic today, you know, just indoor plants. Have indoor plants. You know, house plants are a huge thing right now. You know, definitely not my strong suit of subjects, but indoor plants are awesome. That's kind of like we got plants in this room today. You know, which is pretty cool. You know, there's you know, in some of these items and plants too, you know, house plants can be herbs and other things. So it's
they can
very versatile.
Right? Yeah, that's for a different episode. Maybe next time we'll get into house plants. I don't know. I mean, I think that's about the conclusion. It's a really good outlook on containers, what types we have, kind of the needs and how they're different from planting things in the ground, the pros and cons, and a good little list of fruits and vegetables and
I mean, container gardens for everybody. You know, there's not a single person who can't benefit from it. You know, even if you're just growing for looks and
you can use almost anything. You know, the one thing I would like to say before, you know, we get off of here is, don't spend a lot of money on it. Do not spend a lot of money on containers, right? Because it's kind of I feel like it's just a crime against yourself to spend a lot of money on stuff you can get for free.
I think too, like, you know, nice containers have their place for aesthetics and for certain areas, but whenever
front yard, on your porch, right, on the walk up, but in the backyard,
when you're learning, like, do it inexpensively so your mistakes don't cost you.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. Well, thanks for all the info, man. I feel like I've learned something.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time here on the Compost Pile.